Today, in Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia, the May 9th holiday is banned. Victory in the bloodiest war is no longer officially celebrated, even though the peoples of the Baltic republics fought against Nazi Germany. But it was not always like this.
This is Moscow speaking. This is Moscow speaking. In commemoration of the victorious conclusion of the great patriotic war of the Soviet people against the German fascist invaders, the 9th of May is hereby established for our country as a nationwide celebration of the Day of Victory.
The 9th of May, 1945. At 2:10 a.m., Yuri Levitan's voice broke the silence.
Germany has capitulated.
Germany had capitulated. The war, terrible, bloody, which had claimed tens of millions of lives, was over.
Eternal glory to the heroes who fell in battle.
Like the entire Soviet Union, the Baltic region was waiting for news of victory. Families and neighbors gathered around radios. Hearts were beating in unison. And when the long-awaited word victory was heard, the streets erupted with joy. People rushed out of their homes, embracing each other with tears of happiness. It was a spontaneous outburst from a people who had endured 4 long, exhausting years of war.
The Baltics, liberation came a little earlier. In 1944, most of the Baltic territories were free, and this liberation was not, as some people claim today, a second occupation for locals. It was truly liberation. My entire childhood was connected with Riga, with Brezhekne, Latgale. Here, I was born in Latgale, and I speak the Latgalian language. I studied in Latvian school, so we were liberating our own homeland. In Riga, we were welcomed with flowers. And when we crossed the border of Latgale, I remember milk cans standing there. They gave our soldiers milk to drink. And we even had, I think, a junior lieutenant named Bulls. We crossed, and his farm happened to be nearby. And he met his parents there. They waited 3 years. Many memories have survived, of course. These soldiers of the Baltic Rifle Corps and from Red Army soldiers of non-national units, about how they were received by the locals. In most cases, local people greeted them with flowers. This was understandable because, although the Nazi occupation regime in the Baltic region did not take the same genocidal form as it was, in Russia, Belarus or Ukraine, it was still a very harsh terrorist regime, from which the local population suffered greatly, of course. And so there were celebrations in 1944, when the Liberators arrived there, and of course, May 45.
The atmosphere of May 9th in the Baltic states was unique. It combined both joy and sorrow. Joy because the war was over. Songs and children's laughter could be heard again. Sorrow because many never returned home. This duality, remembrance and celebration, grief and joy, defined Victory Day. To celebrate life while remembering the sacrifices that made it possible. In the following years, Victory Day sometimes was a public holiday, sometimes a working day. But people always gathered together.
The 9th of May was more of a, so to say, local holiday. Honestly, I think that sometimes it was more of a grassroots initiative from the people itself. I think so because the authorities before 1965 believed that the main holiday was May Day. The 1st of May, it was considered a socialist holiday. But, well, the authorities could not ignore the completely unnatural desire to celebrate. That would have gone against all possible logic. Vladimir, look how handsome the old fellows are. Still looking good. It's nice to see the old boys again. Indeed. When I look around now, there are still so many of us alive. Yeah, thank God. I was wounded by the same shell as him. Yeah. We were together. I carried him. And both my legs were shattered then. Both of his legs were broken, His legs were broken and I was concussed. And now we meet again in this life. And nevertheless, God was merciful. I made it back. Let you go, did he? Yes, he did. And that's good.
Veterans of the Great Patriotic War were honored in the streets. Their names were known. School children knew their feats. In Latvia, people were proud of their rifle divisions, which fought heroically near Moscow and Leningrad and helped liberate Riga. In Lithuania, people gratefully remembered the soldiers who brought back peaceful life. At Antakalnis cemetery, the fallen were honored. In Estonia, the bronze soldier became the main symbol of victory, a monument erected beside the mass grave of Tallinn's liberators.
When specialists from the National Center studied this topic, they discovered a lot of things, articles and reports that appeared even before these monuments were built, showing that local residents themselves initiated their creation. There are very interesting reports from the openings of those monuments. Newspapers of that time describe how these monuments were created and what they meant for the formation of the culture of historical memory.
On May the 9th, guests came to the Baltics from across the Soviet Union. Latvians, Lithuanians, Estonians, Russians, and people of many other nationalities stood together, remembering the price of victory. Back then, no one divided people by language or origin.
There were always demonstrations, a parade as well, and back then, my grandfather always went to that parade. Anatoly Pavlovich Dedov retired with the rank of major and fought the war, including helping liberate Lithuania from the Nazis. For us, it was always a big celebration. Very often, my grandpa's cousins would come from other parts of the Soviet Union, often remote ones. It was a reason for the whole family to gather. They would go to the parade. Well, not every single year, though. Sometimes my grandfather went alone. Sometimes he took me with him when I was asking him. And when he went out, we lived quiet. Let's put it this way, district called Jarmuna Street, and in the evenings there was a ringing silence that lasted until morning every night. Even cars were very rare there. In that loud silence, my grandfather would get ready, pinning all his medals and orders to his uniform, jacket, and go to the parade. And I would hear that steadily metallic sound, clink, 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 clink. I knew it was grandfather heading to the parade. Clink, clink, clink. From afar, that meant that he was coming back from the parade. I am very proud of my grandfather, Anatoly Pavlovich, Grandpa Tolya, and of his cousins as well, since my childhood This holiday was the most important one in our family. Well, a big one. We celebrated November the 7th. The Victory Day left me very warm memories.
Victory Day became a holiday people waited for with all their hearts, a part of family history. And it seemed it would always be that way. But time passed and the world changed. Decades later, what once united people was suddenly called into question. A memory that had once been shared became subject of dispute. And a day of national celebration became a matter of political dispute. (1988), the height of perestroika. The Soviet Union is approaching collapse. Post-war emigrants began returning to the Latvian, Lithuanian and Estonian Soviet republics. Committed anti-Soviets, collaborators and their descendants, they bring with them ideological frameworks developed by Western institutions during the Cold War. Many former Komsomol members, Baltic Communist Party members and Soviet officials join nationalist movements. Political opportunists see the collapse of the Union as a chance to enrich themselves. Only one thing was required: to swear loyalty to a new ideology, Baltic nationalism.
The main reason, in fact, was that people who had once appeared loyal to the Soviet authorities suddenly gained opportunities for uncontrolled activity, gained opportunities for some social advancement, and they took it. Thus, a structure was formed. As soon as the system loosened during perestroika, problems appeared immediately. It was rooted in the structure of the state itself. The political situation today in our republic is extremely difficult and alarming. In Latvia, there are organized forces that speak in the language of perestroika while pursuing their own selfish goals. Most importantly, there is deliberate incitement of ethnic hostility, putting people of different nationalities against one another.
The goal of nationalists was clear: to secure the power of the new elites and prevent any reunification of the Union, to build a world where Russians would be a second-class people, to deceive them, rob them, and strip them of their historical memory.
Like any Russian person, I am seriously worried about what is happening in Latvia, in the whole country. You can feel it every day. You can see it in the streets, on buses, in public spaces, in shops. It seems that when certain democratic principles were introduced in our country, they turned into something completely different. It turned into chauvinism.
Just be cheerful, then everything will be quiet. Right now they are speaking out against Latvians. Let them leave, we're not holding them. That Russians are scumbag. Russians are being expelled from Latvia. You don't need us. I have lived here since 1950. My father helped liberate Riga. He was wounded in Riga, you understand? He lived here his whole life. And someone once said to my face, "We never asked you, or your father, or the Russians. We never asked to liberate Latvia. So nicely, please, pack your things and go away."
The state machinery of discrimination was launched. It deprived Russians of citizenship and their children of the right to study in their native language.
As the political course developed, they moved deeper and deeper into Russophobia. The problem was that, regardless of our relations developed in the 1990s, between nations of our states, they believed memories of the past should be erased from living generations. But I want to note that two of those republics, Latvia and Estonia, deceived their people. A very big part of it especially the Russian-speaking community. During discussions, long discussions about leaving the Soviet Union, they promised that everyone living in Latvia and Estonia would live happily in the future, independent country, regardless of its future name. But from the very beginning, they introduced the concept of non-citizens, and their number reached 30% of the population in Estonia and 40% of the population in Latvia. Today, the numbers are smaller. During the years, some people left, some passed away, others managed to naturalize. But that was this awful deception. No matter how long you lived or worked in this country, in Latvia, you are a foreigner. You had to prove, by different ways of your loyalty at the same time. Every effort was made to complicate your life as much as possible.
There is discussion of so-called Latvian citizenship, which would apply only to those who lived in the country before 1940, or to their descendants. People are worried.
What people are worried? Excuse me, please.
It's not true, you're lying.
What people are worried? Excuse me. Who is worried here about? The appearance of the willing people, those who live abroad, for example, or those who were once deported, I don't know, for example, to Siberia, that they may come back home. But that should be welcomed. Thank God the nation is returning home, isn't that right? What do you think?
That's right.
Young man, tell me, yeah? And besides, why stir up hatred between people? I don't understand. Who needs this? Do you understand what's going on here, right?
Who started it?
Who came here first with all the banners? Tell me. Who came here first? Tell me. Who came here first with the banners? Excuse me, but can you say why? I cannot forgive this because what is happening now is already unforgivable, you know? Who organized this? Yes, who organized this? Can you say? Ask yourself about it. Who organized all of it? Well, in any case, it was not the people. Ask yourself about it. Certainly not the Latvian people. So what people organized it?
And I think this persecution of whole peoples that is happening now benefits bureaucrats and officials. It is the old principle of the Roman emperors, divide and rule. That is, the method of stagnation, to set one people against another, so they themselves can hold on to power.
The descendants of collaborators entrenched themselves in power and took the highest positions in the Baltic countries. Their political fuel became hatred. Hatred of the Soviet Union as the victorious country. Hatred of the Soviet people as the victorious people.
Get out of the Baltic region. Because if you acknowledge the existence of the secret protocols of the Molotov Act, then get out. Even Stalin admits it now. So why don't they leave?
As we know very well, in the post-Soviet period, many descendants of those who fled west with Hitler's forces, like cowards, ended up in exile in Canada or the United States and built successful careers there. Who is Adamkus, for example? A descendant of those Lithuanians who ended up in the United States after World War II. Who is Vaira Vike-Freiberger, for example? The same thing. The same kind of figures can be found in Estonian politics as well. It seems it was an ideology of grievance, a resentment and anger, hatred and so on. Those embers kept smoldering, so to say, and at some point, fertile ground appeared. At times, superficial judgment and the ease with which these events were assessed allowed these distorted views, which appeared in modern times, to form the idea that things were not so bad, that nothing was clear-cut. It turned out that no one could place an equal sign between fascism and communism. It did not emerge on its own, you know, it was a position, taking shape among a category of people who were seeking a kind of revenge, so to say.
The heirs of the defeated decided to rewrite history. They dreamed of refighting the war. The shared victory that had united people for decades became the main target of their attacks.
What should we call such awful actions? It is sacrilege, attempts to extinguish the external flame in cemeteries and destroy your monuments. What should we call that? How should we judge it?
I helped to liberate Latvia. And now, in today's Latvia, they call me an occupier, a migrant. Psychologically, all this is harder to endure than the war itself. Can you even imagine?
Now, the hammer and the sickle symbol. You saw it there, on a poster, on a sticker, with a hammer and sickle and the swastika. But did you notice the year? Did you notice the year, huh? The year, did you see it? 1939. And those two hands, the hands of two allies, unfortunately.
They declared Latvia's, Lithuania's and Estonia's voluntary entry into the USSR in 1940 to be an occupation, and the liberation of the Baltics from Nazism to be a second one.
Everything that stands in our way is the past behind us, and the past still present. And the future of the Republic depends on how we free ourselves from that past.
A new myth replaced the old holiday. The Baltic countries were now portrayed as victims of two regimes, the Nazi and the Soviet regime. But while fascism was mentioned less, talk of Soviet occupation grew louder.
When I was looking around the Occupation Museum, I thought, by the early 2000s, I understood what kind of regime this was. At the very least, I thought there would be 50% about the German occupation and 50% about the Soviet one. I imagined like this. Judging by their nationalist views, but apparently I thought too well of them. I overestimated. There, the German occupation takes up less than 10%. Everything else is the Soviet occupation regime. You see bunks, Latvians in the Gulag, collectivization, repression, another repression, another repression, murders, repression, all of it. That is what it is, what you can say. One could imagine that in Latvia, more than 350,000 people, peaceful civilians, Latvians, Jews, and other living in Latvia, were killed during the German occupation before October 1944. Soviet occupation? Occupation meant building factories, ports, shops, cultural institutions, theaters, cinemas, a rise in education, universal schooling, universal literacy, universities, concerts, composers, poets. That was occupation. If that is occupation, then there's nothing we can do. When you cut a huge piece out of your own history, not even cut it out, but tear it out with blood, you lose a part of yourself as a state. And you lose that very national identity too, of course, because in the Soviet years, it was no occupation. They were years that were absolutely positive, if not outright happy, for many republics of the former Soviet Union, including the Baltics. The national language was taught in schools. For example, I studied in a Russian school, but from second grade onward, we were required to study Lithuanian. And in other republics, it was much the same. It was mandatory, with enormous respect for national traditions, national culture, national history. Anything can be turned upside down, twisted. Today, the threats to identity are greater.
Lies quickly found their heroes. SS legionnaires, war criminals, Nazi accomplices suddenly became freedom fighters. Ministers welcomed their marches and they were applauded under state anthems. The legionnaires were showered with honors and privileges. And though only a few actual SS men remain today, the fan club of their admirers and followers keeps growing.
How did it all begin? With marches of these former punishers, the Forest Brothers. There are a few of them left now, most of them have died off. Some there, some in the West, but now their descendants march on the streets. So they should understand whom they are honoring. This or that man was, in fact, not merely a participant in the Holocaust, but someone who personally murdered Jews in the Baltics, in Latvia, or personally shot Red Army soldiers. Or, not far from Tallinn, there was a concentration camp for civilians and POWs. That's it. And who guarded it? Estonian punitive battalions. They stood guard, shot people, finished off civilians, and later, when our troops advanced in September 1944, they simply began burning the bodies. And in the camp, in Latvia, in Salaspils, they took blood from children. Today we publish these children's recollections. There was one girl and her sister who died because all their blood was drained for German soldiers to use. And who did it? Among others, Latvian punishers. There he is. And today, they honor him. How is that? There are absolutely unique plaques here. For example, Ragnar Johansson died in Berlin on May the 1st. I look at that plaque and understand that putting it up in Berlin would have been impossible. Here it is possible. The pleasure costs $200. For $200, you can hang any plaque.
And why couldn't it be put up in Berlin?
Because it was the SS, Nordland Division.
Why is this possible in the Baltics? There is clearly a geopolitical context, but I want to draw attention to the strictly historical one. We are talking about the glorification of their own legionnaires who served in those very nationalist SS formations that committed crimes on the territory of the USSR, in the Pskov and Novgorod regions, in the Baltics themselves, in Belarus, in the western regions of Russia. Everywhere in these places, those nationalist battalions committed atrocities and crimes. But when the Nuremberg trials held the Nazis to account, they did not classify the actions of nationalist battalions as criminal. They did not even judge these battalions in any way. The SS as an organization was condemned, but the nationalist battalions within the SS was not singled out as criminal. And so, from a formal, historical and legal standpoint, we cannot fully rely on the Nuremberg ruling here if we go strictly by the letter of the law. Of course, that loophole was exploited. That half measure in the past created an opening for the revival of this ideology. And today we must understand that there can be no half measures in condemning Nazism.
In one of the countries, Latvia, a rally and a march of veteran legionnaires from the Latvian SS divisions will take place. We are now about to see footage from last year, when on March the 16th, 1998, a similar rally and march took place in Riga. I assume the same footage will be shown on the news tomorrow.
But there are no Nazis in Latvia. We believe our former soldiers have the right, and indeed should, remember their fallen comrades on this day. History must be known. And our misfortune is that, unfortunately, neither our president nor our foreign minister has properly explained to the whole world what disaster and sorrow brought upon the Latvian people, that Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939 and the first Soviet occupation. Had there been no first Soviet occupation, there would have been no Latvian Legion either.
I cannot agree with Minister Kalmans. If Minister Kalmans claims and the legionnaires in general claim they fought for an independent Latvia, it is known that they swore allegiance to Hitler and Germany. There was no Latvia here. There was Ostland, there was General Plan Ost, which by around 1962 envisioned Latvians being partly Germanized, partly exterminated, and partly scattered across the northern regions of Russia. It was signed by Reich Minister Rosenberg. Himmler said that the Latvian Legion was needed so German mothers would have fewer sons to mourn. In other words, they were cannon fodder. So, unfortunately, I do not believe the legionnaires fought for Latvia's freedom. This always struck me. The cultivation of these tendencies seems to have taken place closer to the European bureaucracy, as it seems. It is hard to imagine that the German people as a whole would accept such things either, in their own country or in another. Any normal person understands that something is wrong here, that sooner or later it becomes more than discomfort. It contradicts common sense and the very meaning of life, of a human. But it suited the bureaucracy to cultivate these roots where politicians were weaker and more dependent, where they were either allowed to do this or prevented from resisting it. They just couldn't resist. While elegant words and explanations were found, like, this is not what you think, this is different kind of fascism, they did not call it fascism. They called it tolerance, because everyone has a right to their own opinion.
The Russians of the Baltics did not accept the pseudo-reality imposed on them or the historical lie. For decades, they preserved the memory of the Great Patriotic War. For them, May the 9th remained a day of pride and became a day of resistance to Baltic nationalism and historical myth-making.
On the eve of the holiday, Lithuanian television read out an address to the people of Lithuania adopted by Parliament. It stated that the victory of May 1945 brought Lithuania neither peace nor victory, and that the long years of fighting the Stalinists followed. The Supreme Council is urging residents of the Republic to stay at home. Despite this address of the Supreme Council, thousands of residents of Vilnius and visitors to the capital, carrying bouquets of flowers, filled the city's central streets. While at the end of Gediminas Avenue, participants of the military parade and mass workers' demonstration gathered, at the other end, groups from the Freedom League and the Geneva 45 organized a rally, which, according to leaflets distributed the day before, was directed against what they called a demonstration of force by the occupiers. People with very different views lined the sidewalks along the city's main avenue. Perhaps never before had so many flowers been handed or thrown at the feet of soldiers and veterans, nor so many congratulations been heard in their honor. But at the same time, they also had insults and hostile shouts.
On Victory Day, residents and visitors of Vilnius brought flowers to Antakalnis Cemetery. In Narva, people gathered at the monument to the T-34 tank. In Tallinn, at the Bronze Soldier. In Riga, every May the 9th, tens of thousands came to the Liberators' monument with flowers. The authorities of Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia made extraordinary efforts to erase Victory Day from the consciousness of the Russians, to deprive Russians of their past and their future. The conflict intensified. A war of memory became inevitable.
The turning point came in the year 2004, when the Baltic states joined the European Union and NATO. After joining the EU and NATO, exactly after that, the glorification of Nazi collaborators sharply increased there. Why? First, they felt no longer had to consider Russia's position. It wasn't necessary anymore.
We are in NATO, in the EU, and secondly, this ancient historical policy, anti-Russian in its essence, always became one of the few spheres in which Baltic politicians could remind the EU of their existence, first of all, and at the same time find their niche within the EU's internal division of roles, so to speak.
This is a very special occasion for the European community and the countries Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, which has been made possible by the dramatic changes in your countries that have hardened all who value liberty. These agreements establish the legal framework for our trade and economic relations. They also carry a clear political message. They proclaim the attachment of both parties to the basic values on which our societies are founded: human rights, democracy, the rule of law, and economic freedom.
They had to hurry because if 10 or 20 years had passed, with the three Baltic states remaining outside any larger structures, outside the former Soviet Union and outside the European Union, outside any structure, their weakness would have become fully visible. And in fact, it is becoming visible even now. And to accelerate their integration, as they could, this integration with the EU and later NATO, the Baltic states did something rather cynical. They realized that acceleration was possible only by maximizing tensions on the eastern direction with the new Russia. Russia had to be provoked into some kind of reaction, some kind of answer, and those reactions could then be presented as a threat from which the only salvation was the EU and NATO. So they constantly were choosing the path of conflict. They created as many irritants as possible in relation with Russia, not necessarily because they wanted conflict, but because they wanted to use tensions with Russia to resolve their problems in their movement towards Europe and the Euro-Atlantic structures.
Even those who have never heard this Baltic language will likely understand a few words of this phrase spoken in Latvian. The Latvian president is speaking about Russians. And literally, on May 9th, they will place dried wobla on newspaper, drink vodka, sing ditties, and heroically recall how they conquered the Baltics. The public reaction was immediate.
On the one hand, Europe turned a blind eye to all of it, even encouraged it all. These political regimes existed within those countries. A political elite was formed. It did not form immediately. At first, it was still possible to maintain dialogue with reasonable politicians, but gradually they were replaced, after a kind of political rebranding, by people expressing increasingly hostile attitudes. It suited them that a significant part of the population did not vote and remained outside the election, 30–40% of the population. As a result of this, nationalists gained the perfect ability to shape parliament and government as they wished. They got used to the fact that part of the population was deprived of rights, allowing them to impose any decisions they wanted to. It turned out to be convenient, and they grew accustomed to it, no longer feeling uneasy about it. Even in the 1990s, we encountered politicians in Latvia. I even knew some of them, personally, who felt uncomfortable about this and tried to find some kind of solution. They tried to find common ground. Today, even if we examine the political landscape, the political situation of Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania with a magnifying glass, we will not find such people.
May 2006, Estonian nationalists and radicals staged a series of provocations near the Bronze Soldier Monument in Tallinn. Anti-fascists and Russian-speaking residents united in a public movement called Night Watch to defend the monument. A year later, the Estonian government unanimously decided to move the monument from Tonismägi Hill to a military cemetery.
Тогда еще действовало двухстороннее соглашение.
At that time, a bilateral agreement on preserving the military memories was in force.
Воинских мемориалов и памятников.
I was a State Duma deputy back then, and on my own initiative, I asked the Estonian ambassador in Moscow. I'd rather not name anyone, so I asked him about it. We understood that everything was moving towards a forced relocation of the monument. So I said, if we agree that a monument will be moved, since you claim it merely obstructs traffic and that is the only issue, it's not about history, it's about traffic. So you want to solve the problem, then move it to another convenient location, but in agreement with us, with our consent, and of course, with full honors, with a military orchestra and a salute, and with the understanding that the monument is not being moved because it is wrong, but simply because it will stand elsewhere, equally protected and respected. I had not consulted anyone, but it seemed like a possible, reasonable way out of the situation. The times were different back there. And so what? The Estonian ambassador later came back and said they had spoken with their authorities and it could be possible if formalized. I had only expressed my personal opinion. But before I could even start working on it, our own so-called patriots, whom I remembered by names, leaked the information to the press, accused me of betraying national interests, and destroyed this agreement. After that, the monument was removed with honors, in a disgraceful manner and with casualties. As we know, it was... Perhaps Estonian radicals would have sabotaged the agreement as well. I cannot say now. But there had been a chance to bring our position closer and protect the memory of those whom the monument was dedicated and who were buried there, because there were graves there. That was the first time I personally felt the threat posed by the Nazification taking place in Estonia, the glorification of Nazis and the denial of the Red Army's sacrifice.
At night, Russians stood guard by the monument, having come to defend the bronze soldier. They wanted to protect their memory, their symbol, to prevent it from being desecrated.
On April the 26th, at 3:30 a.m., authorities officially began preparations for excavation at the burial site. Several dozen police officers surrounded the monument in a tight ring. The car of the night watch representatives who had been on duty was surrounded by police.
They punctured my tires and smashed the window. Guys, the way they dragged me out from my car like a dog, twisted my arms. They jumped out of the car. There must have been about 100 of them. They weren't even shouting in Estonian, just...
The relocation was a planned action. What did it lead to? Mass unrest. They tried then, and still try now. To portray it afterward as some kind of organized operation, naturally blamed on Russian intelligence, of course. But I believe the issue is completely different. It's not true.
I brought flowers for all soldiers, Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Estonians, and those who fought against Nazism. Against Nazism.
We were proud of Estonia, but what have they done to my brother who was buried there? I cannot express everything, forgive me.
The event itself brought people out into the streets. It was this sacrilegious attitude towards the movement, the symbol, the situation, could have been avoided, and there were always ways to handle it wisely and with precision. There are people in the Russian diaspora who could have been consulted before. What we see today is simply the removal of democracy from Estonian and society, because what we see is the clear unwillingness of Estonia's political elite to take into account the opinion of not only 1/3 of the Russian population, but also of many Estonians who oppose the grave-digging law and the policies being pursued today.
Police forces were given a green light to suppress the Russian protest. Special means were used against those Russians who tried to defend the monument. Tear gas, stun grenades, and rubber bullets.
They took us to the customs terminal at the Tallinn port. For 5 hours, my hands were cuffed behind my back. Of course, there was hope that the people had not fallen into hysteria. No one was afraid. People sang different songs, including "Our proud Varyag does not surrender." Our Russian girls were wonderful. It was moving to see and hear them. But next to me were Englishmen, and Finns too, who were beaten with batons because they refused to kneel before Estonian police officers.
Around 1,200 people were detained in the harshest manner. 50 people were injured. The Estonian state showed Russians their place with a police baton. The police response was excessive. Mockingly sheltering behind the law, officers publicly denied their own brutality, even though the whole world could watch it live on air.
All actions taken by the police to calm the situation in the streets, to ensure peace and safety for those who were not involved in the unrest, were fully in accordance with laws of our country and with universal human values. Many comments claiming that the police set up illegal filtration points to detain people do not correspond to reality. All people detained as criminal suspects in some way were taken to the police station. Procedural actions were carried out with the prosecutor.
One of the protesters, 20-year-old Russian citizen Dmitry Ganin from the Estonian town of Mustvee, was killed. 10 years later, the Estonian prosecutor's office closed the Ganin murder case. Those responsible for his death have still not been punished. The bronze soldier was moved to the military cemetery. But that was only the first lost battle.
The authorities used it for their own purposes anyway. They turned it into a demonstrative story about Russian behavior at every possible level. Bilateral ties, working groups, even though the Bern group among European intelligence agencies. They have different communication channels and means. And one of the practices is that every country reports on significant events. Naturally, this event was included too, with versions 1, 2, 3 of how it all happened. Naturally, there were Russian special services. Naturally, the authorities did everything to prevent this, but aggressive Russians, see how they behave. That story is being spun today. And everything is done to use it. And well, so to speak, to further inflame the situation when needed.
We will support it, yes, we will support it.
After the 2014 coup in Ukraine, in which the Baltic authorities played their part, all barriers to discrimination against Russians were removed.
This Baltic story played a very bad trick on a united Europe. Because once Europe chose to turn a blind eye to neo-Nazism, to violations of rights, to the suppression of language rights, to what they were doing in education, primary, secondary, and higher education. And beyond that, once Europe turned a blind eye for short-term reasons to what was being done, then the so-called enlightened Europeans deprived themselves of the ability to object to the same ugly, inhuman manifestations of geopolitics that began appearing in other post-Soviet countries, first of all in Ukraine.
And strangely enough, if it had all started in Ukraine, I think no normal European would have accepted language bans there, the dismantling of educational systems, the cancellation of culture. It is too incompatible with so-called proclaimed European values. But they sinned once in the Baltics, they kept silent. What happened then in the Baltic states had and continues to have consequences, and only negative ones. Not only for the Baltic countries, not only for the people living there, but in a much broader European and global context.
The Russians of the Baltic region never stopped trying to get through to the authorities. Hoping to be heard, they kept sending a signal. We are here, we have rights, we have memory. Russian local historians looked after the graves of Soviet soldiers. Students took part in battle reenactments. Honest historians preserved the true memory of the wartime events in Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania. Such activity was supported by local veteran organizations, the embassies of the Russian Federation, and specialized Russian foundations. And of course, it was condemned by the Baltic establishment. In 2015, the first Immortal Regiment March was held in the Latvian capital. Thousands walked through the streets of Riga to the Liberators Monument with portraits of relatives who had died fighting Nazi Germany. In the following years, the action was joined by Vilnius, Tallinn, and other Baltic cities.
Thank you all for coming. It means a great deal to me. So many people responded to our appeal. Thank you all so much for the Immortal Regiment.
In 2021, Latvia became the first Baltic country to ban the St. George ribbon. A year later, Lithuania and Estonia followed its example.
Today, the St. George ribbon is a symbol of a very specific position expressed through a person's own action. See? No one in Russia or in the Baltic states can force a person to wear a St. George ribbon. No one can. One puts it on willingly. Why one does that? Because one wants to make a certain position very visible. And the ribbon is persecuted in the Baltic states. Not because it is merely a ribbon, but because of the position behind it. A position that is deeply unwelcomed to the current Baltic authorities. And they are trying to do everything they can to make that position invisible. Moreover, they believe the people who wear St. George ribbons are dangerous to them. So they persecute them. In short, modern Baltics have developed a very effective system for persecuting dissent.
They accuse me because of the ribbons.
It is forbidden here.
Please do not take the girl away, please.
It is forbidden.
Do not take her anywhere. She's committed no crime. What are you doing? What are you doing?
Shame on you! What are you doing?
Any reminder of victory was an eyesore to Baltic nationalists. Gradually, Soviet awards, the Soviet soldier's uniform, and Soviet symbols were outlawed.
By the law in both countries, Estonia and Latvia, the use of Soviet symbols is a crime because they are symbols of Soviet occupation. What is it? Red flags, Soviet orders, red stars, St. George ribbons. In the Baltics, such things can carry criminal penalties of up to 2.5 years, or even 3.
And fines in some countries, for individuals, the fine is 2,500 euros, and for legal entities, it exceeds 30,000. Before the broadcast, we had already started to compare who had more criminal records. You said you had at least one case against you. What was it for?
Yes, I did. Before I left and moved to Russia, I posted a May the 9th greeting on social media. I deliberately chose an image that would not violate Estonian law in any way. There was no St. George ribbon, nothing like that. It showed the order of the war and the words I remember. And for that, I received a police summons. I was interrogated, and they told me that the medal contained a small hammer and sickle, and by posting that hammer and sickle publicly, I was supposedly supporting Russia's aggressive policy.
Of course, no one will say that to your face. But it is done exactly as it should be in a democratic society. There are laws, and if people break those laws, then supposedly they are violating accepted norms and must be held accountable. It's logical, right? Now, the real question is their guilt really that obvious? Personally, I don't think so. Legally, the bar can be raised. Well, so high that any sound, any move, a millimeter to the left or to the right is already treated as a crime. And that's exactly what is happening. When I look at the register of convicted, just in the Baltics alone, I was horrified. And these are people I know, I know in a good sense, people who wanted not only for the Russian-speaking residents, but for society as a whole to develop in the right direction as a genuinely multinational society. They were not like those who want all for themselves.
Russians patiently offered dialogue, but no one listened. In response, the Baltic authorities steadily built a rigid system to suppress every expression of the Russian world. The next act was an attack on monuments.
When our troops were withdrawn from the Baltic states in 1994, agreements were signed that protected both monuments to Soviet soldiers and warriors, and the rights of Soviet and Russian military pensioners living in the Baltic states, as well as their families. Since these were interstate agreements, the Baltic authorities generally observed them as a whole, up until 2022. In 22, they wiped their feet on those agreements with the Russian Federation. They unlawfully began destroying our memorials. And first and foremost, they targeted monuments that were not burial sites. For every monument destroyed in this way, our investigative committee, quite rightly, opens a criminal case.
August the 16th, 2002, Narva. Before the eyes of local residents, the T-34 tank monument is dismantled. People bring flowers to the place where the main symbol of victory over fascism once stood. Soviet monuments must be removed from public spaces. First, this view of the situation is shared by the majority of Narva council members. Second, there is an understanding that this process must be carried out quickly so that tensions do not reach their peak. In November of that same year, the Estonian government formally approved the demolition of Soviet military monuments. The anti-historical bulldozer set its tracks in motion. As of today, more than 100 Soviet monuments in Estonia have already been demolished. Lithuania and Latvia are following the same course.
I asked, by the way, how much the demolition would cost. 1 million, 2 million, 3 million? They do not think about that. They do not think about it at all, because right now they have the taste of blood in their mouths. They want to do as much damage as possible in a very short amount of time. To do harm. They call it a window of opportunity.
August the 23rd, 2002, Riga, Victory Park. In an act of barbarism, the authorities dismantle piece by piece the majestic memorial to the liberators of the Latvian capital.
So singing songs is forbidden?
We're walking in the park, relaxing.
There's no answer.
You are violating media laws.
First, the sculptures of the liberating soldiers were torn down. The next day, the Motherland Monument was destroyed. Then, the 79-meter obelisk of the memorial complex was demolished. In a year and a half, Latvia got rid of all monuments to Soviet soldiers. Latvian nationalists then began to dig deeper into history. A monument to the Russian poet Alexander Pushkin in Riga's Kronvalda Park was destroyed. After their victory over Pushkin, the radicals turned to the monument to the famous commander Barclay de Tolly, hero of the war against Napoleon. It was dismantled on October the 31st, 2024.
All these attacks on the Russian language, on Russian culture, on Tchaikovsky, Dostoevsky, on the monuments to Bulgakov, Suvorov, Catherine the Great, Pushkin. These are absolutely fascist things. This is outright fascism. We saw all of this in Germany in the late 1930s, early 40s. Here, astonishingly, the vaccine the world received back then, in the middle of the 20th century, has stopped working.
Ignoring UN appeals, Lithuania picked up the baton of barbarism. The memorial complex to Soviet soldiers at the Antakalnis cemetery was demolished in December 2002. Memory fell under the crude pressure of politics.
Russia's investigative committee is carrying out systematic and active work to preserve the historical truth about the Great Patriotic War and the memory of its heroes and victims. By order of the committee's chairman, the central office of our organization created a department for investigating war crimes, genocide, and the rehabilitation of Nazism. Among its areas of work is investigating cases of desecration and damage to memorial sites and military burial grounds. Investigators respond on principle to attempts to erase the feat of Red Army soldiers from memory and to diminish the Soviet people's contribution to the fight against Nazism. The agency's staff document what is happening in European countries and the Baltics. There, at a state level, decisions have been made to destroy military graves and memorial structures commemorating those who died during the Great Patriotic War. It must be painful for the relatives who know that their grandfathers and great-grandfathers died while liberating Latvia or Lithuania or Estonia, and that now their relatives are seen not as victors, not as liberators, but as occupiers. And that is not the reality. That must create pain, an inner protest, a cry to say, please, be reasonable, look at how it really was and what history would have looked like without the Red Army's liberating mission, without the Red Army's sacrifice. It would have been awful. And I'm sure that for many people it is also bewildering, as it is for me. When I see monuments being torn down, both professionally and emotionally, I understand that these are, first of all, utterly unnatural processes with far-reaching consequences, and those who initiate them must be held accountable. Because the results of such actions, such games, such manipulation of historical memory, we know it with all certainty, as history shows, are clearly catastrophic.
What is May the 9th for them? A day of defeat? They celebrate May the 8th with Europe. We know how Europe today treats Victory Day as a whole. In fact, it is called a day of reconciliation, a day when we are told to forget. Forget what? The Nazi regime that effectively tried to bring Europe to its knees, to seize the whole world, and destroyed millions upon millions of civilians? How can that be? In Europe, they celebrate May the 8th. We, May the 9th. For us, it is the day of victory over Nazism. For them, May the 8th has effectively become a day of reconciliation with it. Let us forget all the atrocities and these crimes against humanity, all this genocide, and especially the genocide of the Soviets. We will celebrate what we want. So if someone celebrates the 9th of May, we will ban it. We will punish for it, and we will monitor. When I served there, I used to have heartfelt conversations over, so to speak, a cup of tea. And not only tea, yeah? I would say interesting, You can ban Russians from doing all sorts of things. You can take away education, forbid them to dance kalinka, move monuments anywhere, but you cannot forbid them to think in Russian. There has to be some limit somewhere. At some point, you have to stop. How don't you see?
Today, Victory Day in Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia has been officially cancelled. On May the 9th, large gatherings are banned, celebrations are banned, fireworks are banned, songs are banned. Russian communities that preserved the memory of victory have been crushed by the police apparatus and pushed into a dormant state. The year 2002, the beginning of a great Russian exodus from Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania. Some fled to avoid prison. Others were deported by force. Officials obediently carried out criminal decisions, separating children from parents and tearing families apart.
Of course, there's a feeling of sorrow. 13 members of the family remained in Latvia. The draconian laws adopted by the Latvian parliament itself led to some of them suddenly being sentenced to expulsion, even though they had lived there for decades and contributed to the development of Latvia and Latvian state. That did not matter. What mattered was that they passed an exam in the Latvian language. But that was not all. They had to answer questions of loyalty. A special questionnaire was introduced for all foreigners, or those living in Latvia, and even for those merely passing through Latvia, in transit somewhere. You had to answer. You had to answer correctly whether you consider Crimea's accession to Russia an occupation. You had to answer questions about aggression and about what is happening in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine. You had to say whether you supported the demolition of Soviet memorials in Latvia. And if you did not support it, that alone could be the grounds for your deportation. The EU did not order them to demolish these memorials. They made those decisions themselves and destroyed the memorials. But if you do not answer correctly, it does not matter how many years you have lived here, you have children who already are citizens, speak Latvian, it does not matter. Families are torn apart, and you are forced to cross the Russian-Latvian border on foot.
There is nothing good about this. It cannot be good. It is sheer stupidity. It is a disgrace. They are simply expelling Russian people, but for what? For what? For saying what they think out loud? For saying that they are against that? Against this madness? Against the demolition of monuments? Monuments to the Great Patriotic War? How can one possibly accept this?
Following those who were forcibly expelled, other Russians began leaving the Baltics, people no longer willing to endure the growing pressure of nationalism, unwilling to wither away in a world of lies, dreaming of a better future for their children.
I lived there for 40 years and never thought of leaving. So what finally made you move? The child, mostly. We thought about the child's future. We need to speak about this loudly. We need to create conditions in which this part of the population feels supported by our country, and ideally by other countries too. Countries that would condemn such actions by nationalists, politicians. In practical terms, we must always be ready to provide maximum support. If we cannot solve the issue politically, we must receive these people with dignity. The passport of the citizen of the Russian Federation is awarded to Vasily Maximovich Moskalenov. Thank you so much. Congratulations.
A voluntary resettlement program operating in Russia helps people evacuate from the Baltics. With its help, former USSR citizens living in Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania can count on a simplified path to citizenship and a range of benefits, including housing and financial support.
As for protecting the rights of people who still live there, we will never back away from that. We will do it by every means available to us. And besides, unlike in the 90s, and this is very important, we now have a voluntary resettlement program. In the 90s, people found themselves trapped in those 3 countries without any help. Now there are tools in place, and people who can no longer bear living in those countries always have the chance to return to their historical homeland. We will welcome them gladly and provide everything necessary. We will provide help for them. This is the difference between the current situation and the 90s. I believe that in the long run, people who do not want to break their bond with their homeland must either find the strength, together with the citizens of those countries, to change the authorities there, that is, through legal procedures, to ensure that the course of those states changes. This is very difficult in this situation, or they must make their own decision, whether to continue living there or not. Many make that decision and leave. Some move to Russia, some move to other countries. It happens also. But in any case, breathing this Russophobic air in Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania is becoming harder and harder for the people, with conscience, with dignity and self-respect.
People from Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia who have found a new home in Russia now march in the Immortal Regiment in dedicated Baltic columns. In Russian Ivangorod, a guard of honor stands beside a copy of that same Narva T-34 tank. On screens facing Estonia, a virtual Immortal Regiment marches. Portraits of heroes pass by like a kaleidoscope, watched by the residents of Narva from across the river. This is their unbreakable answer. We remember.
Can you hear us well on the other bank? The other side of the river. Great happy victory day, dear friends. Happy great holiday.
The memory of the great victory multiplies and takes on new forms. It lives in millions of St. George ribbons, in the songs of the international festival Road to Yalta, and in the new park Saved Europe, where destroyed monuments to Soviet liberating soldiers have been recreated.
Relatives of those to whom the monuments are dedicated came to the opening of the Saved Europe Park. Among them was the daughter of Konev, Natalia Ivanovna. Konev is the military commander who helped liberate the city of Prague in Czechoslovakia. The monument to him in Prague had been demolished in a harsh and aggressively political way. They did not even allow it to be preserved or moved, although there had been requests, many even. Those images were shown by the media around the world. It was done demonstratively, and when Natalia Ivanovna saw the recreated miniature, it was moving to hear her words of gratitude from the daughter of a marshal, and painful to see her tears when she looked at the monument. I cannot help repeating a phrase of hers that is especially close to me. She said that this park saved Europe is a place of remembrance for all those who gave their lives for the liberation of Europe. She saw the monument to her father not as her personal story, but as a memorial to everyone who gave their lives in the fight to save Europe from Nazism. It was said with such precision, such delicacy for me. It speaks to so many descendants of that million Soviet soldiers who died liberating Europe, and for me, this place has taken on an almost sacred and even sanctified meaning.
Victory Day has temporarily left the Baltics, a tactical retreat. It has left the streets of Baltic cities for family photo albums and for people's hearts to grow stronger there and return in triumph.
First of all, it is impossible to ban it. You can ban its official celebration, but you cannot ban Victory Day, because it is rooted in history, that's the point. And second, for many generations, it is fundamental. It is an inner core, emotional and moral one. I want to stress again that the rejection of Nazism and Victory Day itself represent the triumph of peace, of civilization, of development, of free development. And those who share this understanding belong to different nationalities. They must feel that they are not alone.
Victory Day is natural to Baltic soil, washed with the blood of Soviet soldiers and saved by them from Nazism. The holiday will return. The immortal regiment will once again march through the streets of Baltic cities, a symbol of life triumphing over death. A reminder that the heroes who liberated Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia have names, and those names are remembered with pride. The eternal flame will blaze again and never go out, a stern guardian of the lessons of war which will not be forgotten again.
It seems to me that our government should say, guys, until you restore all the monuments to Soviet soldiers that once stood there, including our T-34 in Narva, including the Bronze Soldier, the monument in Riga, and many others, restore everything as it was. Restore it first, then we can talk. They will say, no, we cannot, we have no money, and so on. Well, guys, but you tore all of this down with such enthusiasm, such zeal, such smiles, such shrieks, and cheers and shouts. Then, excuse me, restore it now.
The destroyed monuments will be rebuilt. Concrete blocks will return to their rightful places, and again stand in defense of freedom and truth. Holding up the peaceful sky over Riga, the giant obelisk will rise again. The sculpture Motherland will once again wear its spring dress, familiar to Latvians, of delicate pink cherry blossoms. Strength lies in unity, the granite soldiers on the eastern slope of Antakalnis will seem to say, standing even closer together than before. And the legendary T-34 will make its final liberating dash toward Narva. Truth will prevail. Normality will return.
In this sense, Russia appears as an island of normality, to which more and more other parts of the world are beginning to attach. And that island is turning into a great continent of normality on our globe. When the influence of that continent becomes so great that resisting it will no longer be possible, I am talking about positive soft power. So then, this holiday will return, even to those countries that are trying so hard to forget their own history.
Victory Day will solemnly return to the Baltics, celebrated on a scale those countries have never seen before. In honor of the grandfathers who crushed Nazism then, and in honor of victory over modern Baltic nationalism. The time will come when every spring the cities of Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania will awaken to a dear, familiar, thunderous greeting. Happy Great Holiday. Happy Victory Day. Hurrah! Hurrah! Hurrah!